have an amazing guest lecturer this evening, Dr. Rich Melheim, the founder of Rich Learning, which is a very cool organization working in a few different sectors, but primarily developing amazing educational tools for children that allow them to virtually interact with a whole new world and learn while doing it. He'll tell you probably a little bit more about himself and his program. I'm really happy to be here with all of you tonight. We have representatives from different schools. We have representatives here from our Korean Nigeria school in Abuja. We have representatives from the Source of Wisdom School in Benue State, as well as a peer school in Benue State. So for those of you that I've met in person, great to see you again, and I'm happy that you're all here. We also have some amazing people from here in Israel joining us from the Reut School, where we host our program here in Israel. And we also have some guests from our traveling teachers group in Nigeria. The traveling teachers are a group of teachers that will be going throughout Nigeria, educating people and working with teachers and students alike on spreading the word of neuroeducation. And hopefully our team efforts that we've been doing with our international team will be able to make that job easy for them. So moving forward, I would love to hand over the stage to Dr. Rich and let him introduce himself and begin sharing with us the joys of neuroeducation. So Rich, the floor is yours.
Great to have you all here this evening. I come to you from the snowy state of Minnesota, where we're getting our second snow. I take a walk every morning to see the sunrise, and as part of my own thought time, get my brain all oxygenated and do my creativity. I write a children's song every morning on my walk, whatever I see that's new. I'm a father of two wonderful young adults, husband for 45 years of a wonderful woman whose first degree was early childhood education. And I'm a very curious student of neurology and the neurology of learning. If you want to go deep after we have our time today, there's a free book online called Rich Learning. If you want to go to richlearning.com and just go to free book and put that, you can download the PDF. Currently it's in English, Mandarin, and Arabic. If somebody wants to translate it into another language, let me know, we can get it done. I'm going to do a little unpacking of how I understand neuroeducation. What are the benefits? What happens when you use the arts, music, art, dance, theater, and fun? We'll even spend a couple minutes on the neurology of fun, what's going on in the brain, what's connecting when you're having fun. And then we'll ask, why should we add it to everything we do as teachers who want to not only put good information in, but draw out? The literal meaning of the word education, educare, educo, one of the meanings is to lead out. You know, the duke is the leader, to lead out. If all you do is cram information in, that's not real education. You have to bring something out, draw something out. And then we'll talk about how you might do an experiment that I'd be happy to be a part of if you want to experiment with maybe a 6-week project and a creative move that would bring excitement to learning, confidence, competence, collaboration, creativity, attention, retention, and all of these are part of neuroeducation, which I'm going to define as the brain meets the body meets the environment. Whole mind education, according to Dr. Annie Patel at the Neuroscience Institute, is whenever you get the brain to meet the body to meet the environment, you're creating a whole mind experiment. So that's what we'll work on, and maybe even we can figure out a way to do a 2-day or a 3-day on your site sometime in the year 2025. Anyway, I was a born slightly dyslexic child. I didn't know I was dyslexic until I was in my 50s, and I went to the Early Reading Dyslexia Center lab at Tufts University in Boston. I was very interested in what's going on in an ADD, ADHD brain and in a dyslexic brain, and how one might short circuit the short circuit of dyslexia if one used music, art, dance, and theater. So I made friends at Harvard with the guy who wrote the book on ADD, Dr. John Rady. I made friends at the Neuroscience Institute on the guy who wrote the book on brain scans and music, Annie Patel. I made friends with Marianne Wolf at Tufts in dyslexia. And I came up with a theory that we could have a richer learning if we embed with more than just the ears. And the 4 different ways I thought might work would be music, art, dance, and theater. We brought in 38 musicians. We wrote 500 preschool songs. We brought in educators who understood the neurology of learning, and we built this concept called rich learning, which stands for recognize, identify, comprehend, and harness. Recognize, identify, comprehend, and harness. In order to learn anything, you first need to recognize that there's something new there. You need to identify what it is, comprehend how it can be used, and harness it. We did our experiments in Ethiopia and in India and in the poorest school system in the south of the US and in my own suburb here in Minnesota with kids who go to concerts and museums all the time to see, will the neurology work no matter where you are? And we found out that it actually does. So I'm going to unpack neuroeducation and the arts, and we'll see how we go. This was our floor in the school in India. We decided to throw away all the desks and make room for jumping and dancing and singing. The official teachers were really upset with us for moving all the desks out, but I said, just give me 6 weeks and we'll see what's happening. And so dancing and singing. Once the music starts, little feet leave the floor. Kids start dancing, jumping, prancing, laughing, spelling, learning, yelling, bodies bumping, hearts a-pumping. Who could ask for more? More what? More oxygen to make the brain attentive, more glucose to make the brain retentive, more brain fertilizer to build healthy brain cells, and less cortisol. Cortisol is a toxic stress hormone that kills baby brain cells if there's too much of it. It constricts blood vessels, it restricts the flow of oxygen, glucose, BDNF to the brain. And if you're moving your body, you're getting rid of that cortisol. And then if you water up, since the lungs, which are made mostly of water, tend to dehydrate if you're doing active learning, you're going to absorb more oxygen. And you're going to have about 20 minutes of optimal attention and retention. So that's what we're going to talk about. 20 to 25 minutes after an active learning piece for maximum alertness and learning ability before the neurochemicals wear off, and then you have to get started all over again. So recognize. Anything new, you first have to recognize it as new. Now, the brain has a little place called the hippocampus. The Greeks called it hippo, which is the Greek word for horse, like hippopotamus, because it looked like a little seahorse. They didn't know what it did, the hippocampus did, but today we do know what it does. And among other things, it takes the new thing that you just learned and it assigns new baby stem cells to connect up with things that are already connected in the brain. It's like you have to hook up the baby to some feeding systems. And if you are going to learn something new, first you have to recognize, which means here's this new thing, and I'm going to hook it up to something that's already cognized. In order to recognize, you first have to cognize. So then you have to identify it. Let's say I see this symbol, which is a C, and I have to recognize it as a symbol that means something. And then I have to have a good teacher to help me identify, what is this new thing? Recognize, identify. And then I have to comprehend. Now, in English, the C can have a couple different sounds. If it's followed by an A or O, it'll always sound like a K. In fact, we made up a song for that. When a C is followed by an A or O, it always sounds like a K. Coca-Cola, California, cauliflower. When a C is followed by an E-I-Y, it makes the S sound. Give it a try. Central, scent, cinnamon, symbol. So we comprehend the rules that go with the new symbol. And then we have to put it to work. If you're going to really learn it, you're going to need to reinforce this new learning over and over again until it fires and wires together with a lot of other neurons that are inside your brain, ready to help you learn that new thing and benefit your life. Recognize, identify, comprehend, harness, and that's pretty much how we learn anything. Now, the brain needs three main chemicals if it's going to hardwire. It needs oxygen, and oxygen gives you attention. There's a barrier between the brain and the blood called the blood-brain barrier, brain-blood barrier, very creative title. And it's there to keep out large molecules like bacteria, but it lets oxygen through without any problem at all. And it also lets glucose through, and the glucose is the sugar that feeds the brain. The brain only makes up a small percentage of the body mass, but it uses a huge percent of the glucose. And it also needs a brain fertilizer, and that goes by the letters BDNF. I call it best darn nerve fertilizer. It's actually brain-derived neurotropic factor, but best darn fertilizer is a whole lot easier to remember. BDNF builds more brain cells. It builds more connections on the brain cells, and it builds more receptors on the connections of the brain cells, which means you have a bigger brain, more capacity to learn, and more firing and wiring that goes. Why do you fertilize a field, for instance? Well, you get a better yield. And if you get more BDNF in your body while you're learning, you're going to have more attention, retention, confidence, competence, creativity, collaboration, all those things that you'd want in school as a teacher. All these things come to you when you're moving your body significantly more than when you're sitting in a desk. As a matter of fact, if you're a neurologist, you would not be sitting for most of the class. You would be doing about 20 minutes of active learning, and we write music and we sing and we dance and create art and we have fun doing that. We'll get to the neurology of fun in a moment. And then you hydrate, and now you can sit down and talk about what you just learned. You're giving yourself all of the equipment you need to really, really have a deep understanding. You don't put cheap gasoline in a high-performance sports car and expect optimal results. You need high-octane fuel, right? Octane, oxygen, right? Well, if we're sitting in our desks most of the time, we're not putting the high-octane fuel in this amazing 100 billion neuron, quadrillion connection learning machine we have sitting on the top of our heads. So we need oxygen, glucose, and brain fertilizer, among other things. But we also need to get rid of the stress hormone cortisol. Now, you need a certain amount of cortisol just to wake up in the morning. There is a balance between cortisol and the sleep drug melatonin that you have all day, all night long. But too much cortisol is toxic to learning. Too much cortisol literally shrinks the brain, and it kills the baby neurons. So we need to do things in class to get rid of the stress. When my daughter was going to kindergarten on the very first day, we walked down to the neighborhood school with her, and as I was hanging her little Snoopy backpack up on a hook, I stood up, and there at my eye level was a quote by Rita Dunn: "If the child is not learning the way you're teaching, then you must teach the way the child learns." And that was at my eye level. That was for the adults in the room, not for the children. If the child is not learning the way you're teaching, then you must teach the way the child learns. Well, how does the child learn best? That's really our topic for today. I want to give you a brief history lesson. For most of human history, before Gutenberg showed up, we were learning with visuals and with experiences and with music. Troubadours could come to town and sing you 40,000 lines of an epic poem, the Iliad or the Odyssey. We were learning with stained glass windows, with art. And even before that, we were learning with music and drums pounding and singing the tales of our ancestors. This was how we passed on information before the printed word. When the printed word showed up, for quite a while, it was only for the rich, only for the educated. Gutenberg shows up, and the idea that everybody should learn to read was a pretty radical idea. Even letting girls read, oh, what a radical idea that is. But our brains started shifting. And of course, the Greeks, when they started writing from left to right, they turned us all into left-brain Western people. In Mandarin and in Kanji, you're reading with the pictures as well as the linguistic and phonics centers up above the left ear. And so you're connecting more of your brain if you're learning to read in Mandarin or Japanese. I wonder why so many more of the physics and advanced doctoral students at universities here in America are Asian students. Well, they grew up their whole life learning with their whole brain, reading with their left and their right brain. When the television era showed up, part of our brain that was processing music and sound and stuff just didn't develop as much as it had before. And more of the visual cortex showed up, and the concept of couch potato showed up, right? We had more capacity in our visuals, but even our imagination areas started shrinking a little bit in the brain because television was just feeding you everything. We have now entered what my mentor Len Sweets calls the TGIF era, the Twitter, Google, iPhone, Facebook era, where there's much more going on, much more targeted information, and very, very soon we're going to enter the metaverse era where you will put on the goggles and you can go to the top of Mount Vesuvius and watch a volcano erupt on Pompeii. Or you can go and sit out in the desert and listen to the songs of your ancestors. Or you can fly to the Eiffel Tower and learn your French with 6 kids from around the world. Where you're going to be able to put on the haptic gloves and you're going to feel the basketball when you bounce it. Or the haptic footwear, and you can play soccer with Pele when he was 14 if you want to. It's going to be a much more active learning environment 10 years from now. Maybe for the rich kids, maybe 7 years from now. It's going to be a much more active learning environment than sitting watching. Right now, internet learning is mostly moving 1/187th of your body weight, one finger, and they call that learning. No, it's going to be more active learning soon. But there are things we can do right now that do not cost a penny to get our brains all juiced up and learning the way the brain was taught to learn. Tom Zerner is an amazing neuroscientist, and he got me onto the idea of patterns. He says your brain craves patterns, and it searches for them endlessly. In the absence of adequate sensory input, we even make our own. If you've ever caught yourself in a class tapping your pencil on the table or tapping your foot or doodling when the teacher's talking, your brain doesn't have enough stimuli. It's not connecting with enough patterns to recognize. Your brain is going to make its own patterns, the tapping or the doodling, because your brain loves patterns. We know this is what the brain loves. And so how could we harness things that have natural patterns in them to embed whatever information we want to embed and then draw it out, truly educate? Can y'all see this screen? Read this if you can. Read it with me. I couldn't believe that I could actually understand what I was reading, the phenomenal power of the human mind. According to research at Cambridge University, it doesn't matter in what order the letters of a word are. The only important thing is that the first and the last letter be in the right place. The rest can be a total mess, and you can still read. It wasn't a problem. This is because the human mind does not read every letter by itself. The word as a whole, but the word as a whole, amazing thing. Yeah, and I always thought spelling was important. How is it even possible that you could read that? All of those words had been patterned in so many times when you learned a word. You saw those words millions of times, and your brain's going to fill in what isn't in front of you. Music does that. If you start singing a song, your brain's going to fill in ahead of time what comes next once you know that song. Twinkle, twinkle, little. Your brain has already got that patterned in, and it's going to fill it in for you. Your brain's going to recognize there's a pattern there that I know. It's going to identify that pattern. It's going to comprehend that pattern. What does this mean? And it's going to harness it. So why teach with music? Rossini said every kind of music is good except the boring kind. Music is all about patterns. Music has all kinds of patterns. Dr. Annie Patel, who says the mind is the brain meets the body meets the environment, talks about opera. Music has OPERA, overlap, precision, emotion, repetition, and the end result is attention. Music engages in overlapping parts of the brain. The rhythm of the music is a pattern which will hit a certain part of the brain. If there are lyrics and words, the rhyme of the words is a pattern that's going to hit other places. And twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you, your brain's going to fill in that pattern that knows it already. The sound itself, the pitch, the timbre, the color of the sound, music has all of those things. And all of these different parts of the brain start to overlap. And even the beat's going to be moving through the neurons in your body, and you're going to start moving and jumping. You can watch 3-year-olds do this once you start playing music. Their whole body becomes a learning tool if you're using music because it's overlapping patterns. Music has precision. Music plays significantly higher demands on multiple shared networks, more than speech. If you're only talking, you're activating up above the left ear in the linguistic and phonics centers. You're only activating a smaller part of the brain. If you're talking in riddles and rhymes, you're overlapping in more. If you're talking in stories, if you're telling a story, if you're telling a parable, by the way, the most powerful way to teach is through stories and parables because you're connecting so much more of the imagination and the storehouse of what you already know throughout your brain. But music does this significantly more. Music measures the beat. Music measures the pitch. Music measures the timbre, the color of the sound. Music does all of these things. And so your whole brain becomes a learning tool in precision. Music has emotion attached to it. And it engages and it elicits a strong, positive emotion. Why is it that a song can make you smile? Why is it that a song can make you weep without even any lyrics? What does a melody do? Well, it engages the emotional part of the brain. And as soon as you engage the emotional part of the brain, the rest of the brain is going to start paying attention. Most of your brain, most of your senses have gatekeepers to keep information out. Your brain doesn't want to absorb everything coming at you. Some think that we are only consciously aware of 2 to 5% of all the stimuli that's coming into us at any given moment. Our brain can't handle all the information. Too much information, right? For instance, you're only consciously aware of a small part of what you see right now. But if you stare at the screen and now you kind of think about the peripheral vision, what else do you see in your room right now? Guess what? Your brain was always aware of that, but it said it's not important. Too much information. Your brain has gatekeepers in the visual. Your brain has gatekeepers in the senses. I'm going to have to plug my computer here in a minute. It looks like my Mac will go to sleep if I don't. Take a break and look around your whole room.
Also, while everyone is looking around their room and absorbing everything around them, also, I hope everyone's taking notes and making sure that you guys are recording this information. Also, feel free to write down any questions that you guys have for the end. So that way we make sure that anything that you guys might want answered or further elaborated upon is touched upon. All right, Rich, back to you.
We're actually going to take 3 breaks for questions so that we don't have to, we can deal with things right while they're there and we'll make sure that it's clear. Okay, what did you see in your room once you started paying attention? A whole lot more. Guess what? Your eyes were absorbing everything in your peripheral vision, but it said it's not important. Can you feel the weight of your shirt on your shoulders? Can you feel your belt? Can you feel your socks in your toes? Guess what? You could always feel that, but the brain said, too much information. It's not important. Too much information. How can we focus on anything? How can we absorb what the teacher is saying? If the teacher is only talking, the brain just might start tapping a pencil or tapping a foot. It's not going to focus. Once you get to the emotional brain, the brain focuses, and music has emotion. Some would say that all of your senses have multiple gatekeepers to keep information out. Some would say the only sense that doesn't have gatekeepers is your sense of smell, your olfactory nerve. If there's a smell in the room and your olfactory nerve is working, you're going to smell it. But every other information input thing keeps information out, which is really hard for a teacher, unless you can get to the emotional part of the brain, and then the brain's going to pay attention. Music has overlap, precision, emotion. Music has repetition. And what repetition does is cause nerve cells to fire more efficiently. So if you think of your nerve cells as an electrical wire, if you put insulation on a wire, it'll fire more efficiently. And what repetition does, among other things, is it puts more of a fatty tissue called myelin on your nerve cells. It acts as an insulation. And a nerve cell that's insulated better fires more efficiently. And that's why it's so easy to remember if we repeat and we repeat and we repeat. I saw a stat the other day that it says it takes about 400 reps to learn something if it's new, unless you're using music or play. And then it takes 30 or 40 and you'll have it. So repetition, neurologically very important. The results of overlapping precision, emotion, repetition are attention. Focused attention. And music does that in a way that builds long-term retention. You get focused attention and you get focused retention. Old Plato said music training is the most potent instrument other than any other. Well, it turns out the old Greek was right. Plato must have been a neurologist. My doctorate is in an area of linguistic philosophy called semiotics. And it basically studies symbols and signs and asks, why does anything mean anything to anybody? Semiotics, look it up if you want. For instance, the symbol on the left, if I said math, what's the symbol? If I said English letter, what's the symbol? How about the symbol on the right? It's just 2 scratches. If I said math, what's the symbol? If I said letter, what's the symbol? If I signed a letter X's and O's, what does it mean? Hugs and kisses. Look at the letter on the left again. If I said Mandarin, what does it mean? It's the letter 10 in Mandarin. But if you don't have the context of Mandarin, or if you don't have the context of math, or if you don't have the context of the English alphabet, or if I said religious symbol and you didn't have the context of the cross, it wouldn't mean that. The context creates the content's meaning and focus. Without the context, there is no content. You don't know that's the letter 10 in Mandarin. I don't know if you speak any Mandarin. 我会说一点普通话，我说的不好。 Doesn't mean anything if you don't have the context. A very poor child can have a very rich education if you enrich the context, things that thought can hook up to. When a C is followed by an O or A, it always sounds like a K, 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 Coca-Cola, California, cauliflower. When a C is followed by an E, I, Y, it makes the S sound. Give it a try. Cinnamon, symbol, scent, right? If you can have something to give the context, to remember, overlap, precision, emotion, repetition, attention, you can embed the information faster and they'll know it a whole lot longer. So let's say the context of learning something new is going to be music, and we're going to try to hook our learning to a song that has a melody, that has a hook, that has a percussion, that has a beat. Let's say we're going to do 6 weeks on healthy soil, healthy foods, healthy bodies. What song would we make up for healthy soil? Sam, what would be 3 or 4 concepts for healthy soil?
Awesome. So I'd say one of the first ones is going to be biodiversity. Gotta have diversity in healthy soil. The next one you'd be looking at I would say nutrient availability. Like what's going on in your soil? Do you have things like a lot of rocks or wood or clay or insects? Like understand what's going on there. The next one I would say would be environment, understanding just the overall environment, where like if you're going to have enough sunlight, enough water for making sure the plant is happy. And then I guess the fourth one, the most important one of all, is really that you understand that the plant is alive and that it's going to grow and that your job is just to take care of it. So making sure that the plant is given proper care.
So the plant is alive and you gotta have a happy plant. Do. Biodiversity, nutrient availability, environment. I'll give you another rant. You gotta have sun, you gotta have water, you gotta have great soil and that. Okay. I mean, you could get with your kids, take those concepts, start a beat, have some kids start the beat, and you could make up something that would have all of the content and all of the context in a way that would have attention and have retention. And
healthy soil is Donald, bad soil is Sam.
Okay.
Donald is dark, Sam is white.
You could have so much fun creating these lessons. Okay, so you make up a song for that. You make up a song for a healthy body, what are the concepts? And you ask the kids, you draw out, what do you need to have a healthy body? Well, sleep, exercise, healthy food and water, fun and friends, love and laughter, hugs and kisses, you'll be happy ever after. You create this, okay, and you say to another kid, give me the beat. You say to another kid, let's do a dance. You say how are we going to represent these symbols with our bodies? What's the sun going to be? What's the soil? You could use actual sign language. That's what we do in our preschool. We use actual sign language so that they understand the please and thank you and such, and their whole body becomes a learning tool. Well, if you're using music, you're doing the auditory cortex. You're hooking your train to what they're hearing, but you're hooking it up to so much more. Yes, you're hooking up to the auditory cortex, so your hearing is part of your learning. You're also hooking up to the motor cortex, so your body becomes a learning tool. You're also hooking up to the sensory cortex. All of your senses are going to be part of the learning. You're also hooking up to the adult judgment center, your prefrontal cortex. And by the way, you don't have a fully developed prefrontal cortex until you're 25 or 26. It takes a long time to hook that up. You're hooking your learning, You're hooking your learning up to the cerebellum, to the visual, to the big body of nerves that goes between your left brain and your right brain. So your whole brain is starting to be involved in this. To your hippocampus. What does hippo mean again in Greek? horse, hippopotamus. I gave you a visual before, so now you know the Greek of that. The place where the baby stem cells start turning into long-term, short-term, which will then become long-term memory. You're hooking up to the nucleus accumbens and the amygdala. Amygdala is the Greek word for almond, and the Greeks saw this almond-shaped thing in the brain. That's what they called it. And we know these are emotional centers. You're getting to the emotion. And what does emotion do? It helps you with focus because it takes out the blocked, the blocking to learning. And it says, hey, pay attention.
Okay, so Rich, I thought I heard about the school where you kicked out the chairs and the tables. I'm not quite sure I heard the success rates after some few.
Yes. So I started this project to figure out ADD and ADHD and dyslexia and figure out, can we circumvent it really young? So I started with preschool, and I became a preschool teacher for 10 weeks, for 7 weeks here in my own town, where there are quite wealthy people. Kids have lots of enrichment. Everybody gets good food. Everybody gets, safe place to sleep and healthy environments pretty much. And I lost 15 pounds jumping and dancing and singing all summer doing that. We had hired 38 musicians to write 500 early learning songs, and the experiment was amazing. I can send you video links if you want to see. But then we said, yeah, this works for rich kids, but will it work for kids who don't have a safe place to sleep even, or not necessarily getting to eat healthy food every day, not necessarily having good nurturing environments? So we got invited to the city of Chennai, India. And in Chennai, we had about 1/3 street kids, 1/3 orphans, which was all little girls, because in India they throw away little girls like they don't matter, and 1/3 teachers and professors and graduate students' children. So we had a really good mix. Some kids sleeping under a tent along in inner city roads with trucks going by all night long. We did feed them during the experiment. But the first thing I did is I brought in teachers from 11 cities. And we did 2 weeks of in-depth neurology training, doing what we're doing now, but just very much in depth. And 2 weeks of creating the songs and using some of the songs we'd already written. 2 weeks of give and take, a full day on what the neurology of music is, neurology of art, dance, theater, fun, and then a study of the different parts of the brain that get activated with this. Then 75 kids showed up, 79 kids showed up, and we went straight into this. But I looked at the classroom they gave us, and it was full of desks and chairs, and I knew this is not going to be an effective thing if we're sitting most of the time. Now, this school was very proud of their desks and chairs. They got donations from different, I think, churches around who, this church donated 5 desks, 5 of this, 5 of that. But to have an active learning environment, I wanted to have something that looked more like a dance theater, a dance studio. And so we bought a foamy carpet that you put in pieces, and we set all of the desks and chairs outside. I got so much flack from the administrator. How are they going to learn anything if they're not, sitting in desks and chairs? And I said, just, give us some time. Give us these 6 weeks and a show on the 7th week, and let's just see what happens if we have a really active learning environment. And we are doing the 20 minutes of embedding with music and dance, and then 20 minutes of talk and hydrating. And we don't need desks to sit and talk. Some of them went outside and sat down. And then we would do some art. We had some art supplies, but we made art out of rocks and sticks and flowers and twigs and anything. The nice thing, there was plenty of dirt outside of our school, and so we didn't need digital whiteboards. We would write in the dirt and then erase it and write in the dirt. And we would make the letters with our bodies. Slanty line, sleepy line, A. Slanty line, sleepy line, A. And A-N-T, A-N-T, marching up my leg pant, A-N-T. Please don't bite me, A-N-T spells ant out of my pant. You know, have a little fun with this. We had an amazing 6 weeks, and the 7th week we did a giant rehearsal and a show on the last night. And there were parents and grandparents and village people and neighbors that all came to the show. We took these 3, 4, and 5-year-olds and we tested them spelling with first, second, and third graders. And the things that we had embedded with them in the music and the art and the dance, they were testing against first, second, and third graders and doing better than first, second, and third graders because we had embedded it in this great way. At the end of the 7th week, by the way, I lost 15 pounds in India as well. So if I do this 5 more times, I'm gone. As they said, you will be Gandhi if you do 15. Then the teachers had to go back to their villages and try it themselves for 6 weeks, and 7th week in a show. And then we gathered them back for 3 more days of processing, which is a great model, by the way, if you want to do an experiment in your own country. We could come and do a little bit of training, bringing teachers from different areas, send them back to replicate, and then bring them back to process the whole thing before we would launch it. A year later, or 3 months later, I went back, and I can show you some videos of I'm asking the kids, how do you spell these things, and what are the concepts we learned in math? We didn't do the healthy soil song, the biodiversity nutrients, and you got to have it, and the plants are alive. That would be a fun one to do with you guys. But we had an amazing time. A year later, I went back, and all the desks were back in the school. But the teachers were using some music, especially to embed new information. So at least we made a little headway there. So, Donald, I hope that answers your question.
Fantastic.
It is so hard to fight against entrenched systems. Fatima has a question.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks.
Yes?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Rich. Good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon, everybody. Okay. Oh, good morning. Sorry. Really.
Good evening.
Yeah, good evening. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the knowledge passing far. But my question is actually concerning what you just explained last. Now that's concerning the decks and engaging them in music and allowing them to be themselves, express themselves, making them active instead of just sitting behind the decks at all time like that. My concern now is because of the school type of system or the learning type of system we have in Africa, especially Nigeria, whereby from 8 in the morning, lectures, classes goes on till maybe about 2 or 4 in the afternoon. And peradventure, I take basic science, for example, and I'm engaging my learners, allowing them to do hands-on or do so many activities whereby they are engrossed. My concern now is if this is applicable, because I actually love this. In fact, this is one of the things I put into use. But my concern now is how each learner would be able to cope if this peradventure is done maybe 2 or 3 times in a day. I don't know. Though I know young learners, especially at this age, love to express themselves. In fact, they would rather move around than sit in a place. And mind you, as they're moving around, they are hearing you. In fact, everything you're telling them, it's going in. So I don't usually have a problem with that. But my concern is their ability to stay put afterwards immediately, because we have only about 40 to 45 minutes to teach per day or per lesson. So my concern and my question now, sir, is how applicable is this? If, for example, in a day, they have to go through this about 2 or 3 times with different subjects or different topics or subject rather. And that reason why I'm saying this is because I have observed my learners, especially on Fridays when we have these recreational activities and a lot of things, they are super active for the rest of the day. In fact, anything you engage them, especially my classes, I don't know if it's applicable for other teachers, especially my classes, they are always super excited and engaged because the excitement is still there from the recreational activity they did earlier in the day. So my question now is, Friday especially, we don't do much. So I don't think it is a toil on them. But my concern now is, with this, won't it be a toil on them if it's done like every day of the week? That's just my question, and I hope you actually understand my question.
The analogy of putting high octane fuel in an expensive sports car, would you say let's put cheap gas in it most of the time and then every Friday put good gas in it? If you had an expensive sports car, if you were rich enough to have that, you wouldn't want to put cheap fuel in it or you're going to wreck it. You're certainly not going to get optimal performance. And this brain is an amazing supercomputer that it can do so much. But if we are only activating part of the good fuel in it, it's just a waste. It's just a waste. If you have Fridays where you have more freedom and you say, okay, what are the new things I'm going to teach this week? And how many ways can we at least move? You know, and I wouldn't teach anything new without music and art and theater and interaction. We'll get into that now. But how many ways, and what if every hour we have some movement time? What if every hour we repeat what we just said with some movement, some percussion? After we did India, we were invited to Ethiopia. We had no trouble finding musicians in Ethiopia. We had no trouble finding dancers in Ethiopia. And I thought, instead of hiring teachers, what would the experiment be like if we brought mostly people with gifts in the arts? Maybe they were a teacher who also was a good singer, or a teacher who had some dance background, or a teacher who had some art background. What would it be like if we didn't have this mindset of education training that you have to be sitting quietly in a room in order to have good classroom management, in order to be a good teacher? So we decided, we interviewed 80 young adults who had gifts. They might have been teachers, but they had gifts in the arts. And we chose 20 of them to be with us for the 7-week experiment. I brought 2 of my best teachers from India and 8 of my best teachers from the States. And we had, again, this marvelous, marvelous time. But we used 3, 4, and 5-year-olds, some kids as old as 6. Every hour was a new subject. And every hour started with a song embedding whatever it was that we were going to teach them in math, in science, in spelling and reading. So it was active for about 20 minutes. And then we hydrated and we talked about what we just learned. And the last 20 minutes, they had to create some kind of a piece of art on this concept. So we would do that. We did English first in the morning, then a break. Then we did math second in the morning, then lunch break. Lunch break was like an hour and a half. So there was also go play, go do other things, refocus. Here's the art supplies, here's some costuming, here's some of this. Then we did science after lunch. With the little kids, we always had a nap time, and we can talk about the neurology of sleep if you want a little bit later. And then we had a bigger catch up and then a review of everything at the end of the day. So the end of every day reviewed everything that we had sung, everything that we had danced, everything we did with art. And then Friday was always a big review. If you have more freedom on Friday, even if you're doing a little bit of this during the week, but you put them all together. And then the 7th week was all get ready for a show and do a show for parents and kids. One of the sponsors of our experiment in Ethiopia was the science minister of Ethiopia, who's now the Prime Minister Abiy. And he took all of our teachers out to eat before we flew home, just to thank us and say, wow, if the science of learning proves we need to be more active in the classroom, then maybe we should start thinking about everything we teach starts with a way to get attention and retention and creativity for that emotional connection to things. So we could have a long talk, or we could say, okay, we know we need to do this. Let's go do an experiment and let's see how it works. So,
if you don't mind me adding to that, I think also one thing to add upon what you were saying, and also from what I've heard my mom say, and also what I've seen her do in her experience, is basically, first of all, I think what you're saying, and I completely agree, is like, why give a high performance vehicle poor fuel, right? So I think that when we talk about that on the school level, you need to include the whole school, because there's a lot we can do on, let's say, the micro level within our classrooms on the day-to-day, but to maximize those results, we need to include all of the classes and so on. Oh, excuse me one moment.
and that metaphor works perfectly with nutrition and what you guys are trying to do anyway. You don't put cheap fuel in terms of nutrients, right? And that goes to soil. And I mean, this just covers so much. You want to have healthy everything. So
sorry, can I answer Sam to react to what Sam says?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm Danit. Nice to meet you. I'm a school principal in Israel, in Gedera. And I agree with what Sam says. You have to, it's okay if it's in one class, you want to make it in all the school. It has to start with the principal that has the agenda. But when you're putting inside the school new things, you have to start with the teachers that are into it, and then it's contagious. I mean, they see the other teachers that are not, they are more confirmed and they have problem with doing changes. When they see what it does to the children, it contagions them and they do it too. So it's true that you have to do it with the whole school, but sometimes you have to do it step by step.
Yeah.
Yeah, Denny, I completely agree that it needs to be step by step. And also, just to kind of go back to Fatima's initial comment, I think one of the other things to look at too is like movement and activity doesn't necessarily mean like running and jumping.
Right.
So like a lot of the times when we're working with students here in Israel, that we'll do a lot of work with, like arts, like Rich was mentioning, or breathing activities. So that way, if you're about to send them off to a class where they need to sit and focus, or if they're coming from a class where they were just running and jumping,
or even sitting around in different chairs, different environment, and studying as they do at home, lying down, or I don't know.
Yeah.
Exactly. So
we are we're at the 1 hour mark. And I'm going to let you guys call the audible here. Would you like to go into another session of this, or should we soak this in, download the book, and do another session on another day?
I'd like to definitely invite you to do another session on another day, Rich. This is amazing. I feel so blessed, and I agree with what Sam and Danit were saying, and it totally fits into where we're headed. And wow. Many thanks, Rich.
All right. I did do an audio recording of this, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to build that PowerPoint into a little movie file with the audio, and then you can process this again. Danit, it would be fun to get six principals or superintendents in your area and do a couple days on this. Donald, it would be fun to get, just 6. You don't need a huge number to start with. You just need a few who really want to have an exemplar experience, and then create a 6-7 week experiment, and then let them try other things, process it, and then see if it can grow from there to get some energy and traction.
I will pitch it up to other principals, to the inspectors or whatever.
Okay, so I'm gonna put this together now, and I'll send a link to Sam to send it out. And then if you have 5 or 6 people in mind who would love to be in on the next call, and that would be a good way to plant a seed and water it.
Amazing. So before we wrap up, I always like to kind of wrap things up with something practical or an action item, so to speak, that we can move forward with. So in this case, it'll be a little bit less traditional with like a KPI, but we'll look more at something that we can do at home. You mentioned something about just the concepts of pattern recognition and how the brain is going to be constantly filling in patterns, right? And I think that I can say for myself, definitely when I was in school, and I think even still a lot of times as adults when I'm sitting through lectures or boring conferences, I'll find myself totally just, tapping my pen or, something like that, or maybe, flicking my finger or whatever, and things like that. I think are things that we all experience on a day-to-day. So do you have any tips for how we can incorporate positive patterns and reinforce those positive patterns in our day-to-day experiences while we're taking the bus or going to work or sitting in an airplane or something like that?
Yeah, harness what your brain loves anyway, to advance whatever it is new that you really want to hardwire into the brain. So turn it into a rap or a chant or a cheer or a movement, a body movement, anything that can get the brain, the body, the environment engaged. Teach someone else, ask them for a pattern to help understand the alive and happy plant. Just know that the patterns are going to be a way to hardwire, not only have the attention, but also have the retention.
Awesome. Thank you, Rich. Really a pleasure, and thanks for taking the time out of your day to speak with all of us. We'll have some follow-up meetings with all of the schools individually. So for those of you here in Nigeria or here in Israel, just keep an eye out. We'll be in touch with you to do a recap and a follow-up, and to hopefully schedule part 2 of this awesome lecture, because I think this information is amazing, and that it's great for all of us to start unpacking it together. And then additionally, for those of you who are teachers with our cohort, we will also be having some upcoming workshops coming up in the coming months with also my mom and Miss Anat Maoz. And so stay tuned for all the updates. And if anyone has any questions or anything, really don't hesitate to contact either myself or Donald through WhatsApp. We're here for you guys. So thanks everyone. Thanks again, Rich.